I want to tell you about the day 6 black cars drove into Ula village and made grown men and women cry in the open market like children. I want to tell you about the moment Mama Okafor, the loudest, most fearless woman in our entire village, sat down on the ground in the middle of the market and could not get up. I want to tell you about the silence that fell over our village when the dirty madman we had mocked and chased and poured dirty water on stepped out of the biggest car in a suit that cost more than everything in our market combined and looked at us all with unclean eyes that saw every single thing we had done to him. But before I tell you that part, I need to tell you what we did to him first. Because you need to feel the weight of our shame before you can understand the size of our shock. My name is Chism. I am a village girl from Ula. I was there from the first day he arrived to the last day everything changed. I saw everything. And what I am about to tell you is the truest and most shameful story I have ever told in my life. He walked into Ula village on a hot dry Tuesday morning from the bush road that connects us to the main city. Nobody knew where he came from. He was tall but he walked bent, like something invisible was pressing down on his shoulders. His clothes were rags. His hair was long and matted with dirt. His eyes were open but empty, like the lights were on inside but nobody was home. He walked to the big udala tree at the center of the village, sat down on the bare ground and did not move. People gathered immediately. Not to help. To look. The first stone was thrown by a boy of about 9 years old. It hit the man on the shoulder. He did not flinch. He did not look up. He just sat there. That stillness, that complete absence of reaction, was like an invitation to the crowd. Because when someone does not defend themselves, people do not feel pity. They feel permission. By the afternoon he had been hit with stones, sticks, dirty water, leftover food thrown not out of kindness but out of mockery. Boys chased him around the tree laughing. Mama Okafor, who sold pepper in the biggest store near the udala tree, hit him across the back with her broom 3 times and told him he was blocking her customers. The crowd cheered her like she had done something brave. I stood at the edge of that crowd. I was 17 years old. I did not throw anything. But I laughed. I laughed because everyone around me was laughing and it felt safer to laugh than to be the only person standing still with a serious face. That night they chased him away from the tree. He slept near the refuse dump at the edge of the market. In the dirt. Under the open sky. Alone. And the next morning he came back to the same tree and sat in the same spot and the whole thing started again. This went on for 11 days. By the 11th day our cruelty had become so normal that people barely paid attention anymore. Hurting him had become background noise. Something you did the way you slapped a mosquito, without thought, without guilt, without even really noticing you had done it. That was who we were. That was what Ula village had become around this man. And then Amara saw him. Amara was 24 years old. She lived alone in her late grandmother's small mud house at the far edge of the village. Both her parents died when she was young and she had grown up with very little. She sold firewood in the market and on good days she made just enough to buy one proper meal. On bad days she ate whatever was left from yesterday and told herself it was enough. She was not the kind of person our village noticed. She was quiet. She was poor. She had no husband, no family name with weight behind it, no land, nothing that made people look twice when she walked past. But she had something. Something I have spent years trying to describe and I still cannot find the perfect words for it. The closest I can get is this: Amara was the kind of woman who could not walk past pain without stopping. Not because someone told her to. Not because anyone was watching. Just because her heart was built that way and she had never learned how to turn it off. The morning she first saw him she was coming into the market early to get a good spot for her firewood. She stopped when she saw him sitting near the entrance with fresh cuts on his arms from where boys had thrown broken bottle pieces at him the night before. Dried blood on his skin. Flies gathering around his wounds. Eyes open and looking at nothing. Amara stood there for a long time just looking at him. Then she turned around, went back into the market, used the small coins she had put aside for her own breakfast, bought a wrap of food, came back and knelt down in the dirt in front of him. She held the food out to him. He looked at her hands first. Then slowly he looked up at her face. And I was standing close enough that day to see what happened in his eyes in that moment. Something moved. Something sharp and awake and deeply human that had been hiding very far behind all that emptiness. It came forward for just 1 second, looked at Amora's face, and then pulled back again like it was not ready yet. He took the food from her hands and ate. Mama Okafor's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. She announced to the entire market street that Amora had finally shown everyone what they had always suspected, that there was madness in her family too. She said only a woman with a broken head feeds a man with a broken head. The market women laughed. Traders laughed. Even people who did not hear properly laughed because others were laughing. Amora stood up, collected her empty plate, and walked away without looking at any of them. She came back the next morning with food. And the morning after that. And the morning after that. By the second week, people had moved from laughing to something harder. Something closer to anger. Because Amora's kindness was doing something to the village that nobody wanted to admit out loud, it was making people uncomfortable. Every morning she walked past with her small wrap of food and knelt in the dirt in front of that man. It was like a mirror being held up to every person who had thrown a stone or swung a broom or laughed from the safety of a crowd. People do not like mirrors. Especially ones that show them something ugly. Mama Okafor went to the village head and complained. She said Amora was encouraging the madman to stay and he was becoming a problem. For other market women signed their names to the complaint. The village head sent 2 strong young men to remove the stranger from Ula. I watched them do it. They were not gentle. They grabbed him by his arms and dragged him out of the village on the bush road, telling him if he came back they would make sure he regretted it. He said nothing. He did not fight them. He walked where they pushed him and disappeared around the bend of the road. The market cheered when the men came back. Amora was not there that morning. She came later and found him gone. She asked me where he was and I could not look at her face when I told her. She stood very still for a moment and then she left the market without selling anything that day. She spent the whole afternoon searching. 2 villages down the road she found him sitting under a mango tree. His wounds were worse. His arms had new marks from the rough way they had handled him. She sat beside him in the dirt and she cleaned his wounds with water from the small bottle she carried. She gave him food. She sat with him until the sun started going down and then she stood up and walked home alone in the dark because she had no money for transport. The next morning he was back under the udala tree in Ula. Nobody saw him return. Nobody could explain it. He was simply there again, sitting in the same spot, same position, same empty eyes. Like the tree had kept his place for him. But something in the village shifted that morning. A quiet uneasiness that nobody named out loud because naming it would mean admitting they felt it. Mama Okafor's pepper stall caught fire that afternoon from a spark that came from nowhere. The 2 young men who had dragged him out both had strange accidents within 3 days. One fell badly on flat ground, one burned his hand on a pot he had lifted 100 times before without problem. Small things. Strange things. The kind of things that make a village start to whisper in the dark. Amora noticed none of it. She brought his food in the morning as usual. But on this particular morning something happened that changed everything between them. She knelt in front of him and held out the food the way she always did. He took it. He began to eat. And then halfway through eating he stopped and looked up at her and said in a voice so clear and steady it stopped my heart from where I was standing nearby. Why do you do this? Not the voice of a madman. Not broken or confused or far away. A voice like a river that knows exactly where it is going. Deep and calm and completely present. Amora did not run. She did not look around to see if others had heard. She just looked at him quietly and said, "Because you are hungry and I have food." He held her eyes for a long moment. Something passed between them that I cannot fully describe. Then he looked back down at the food and said nothing more. Amora walked home that morning with her hands slightly unsteady and her heart asking questions her head had not caught up to yet. 3 days later the black cars came. 6 of them. Long and dark and completely clean, moving slowly down the bush road like a funeral that had forgotten what sadness felt like. They stopped at the center of Ula village. 12 men in sharp suits stepped out and stood in 2 lines. The market went completely silent. Even the children stopped moving. The man who stepped out of the middle car last did not rush. He stood beside the car for a moment and looked around the village slowly. He was tall. His clothes were simple but carried the kind of expense that does not need to announce itself. He walked to the Udola tree and stood under it and looked at the crowd that had gathered. And then Mama Okafor made a sound I had never heard her make before. A small sound. A sound like something falling inside a person. Because the man standing under that tree with 12 men behind him and 6 black cars waiting, was the madman. Clean. Shaved. Dressed. Present. Every single light behind those eyes fully on now, fully forward, looking at us all with the calm clear sight of a man who had seen exactly what he came to see. His name was Emeka Obi. And he was one of the richest men in the entire country. His men had a list. A full and careful list. They had been moving quietly through Ula for days before the cars arrived, talking to people, asking gentle questions, recording answers. The list had names. Dates. Descriptions of specific things specific people had done. Stones thrown. Water poured. Broom swung. Complaint signed. Orders given to remove him from the village. He did not shout. He did not insult anyone. He stood under the tree with his hands behind his back and he let his men speak quietly to each person on the list. They explained what was going to happen. The market building most of the traders rented their stalls from, his company owned it. The land the village head's compound sat on, his company held the lease. The supply contract that kept Ula market stocked with goods from the city, his company controlled it. He had not come to fight. He had come to let the truth speak in the language that people who had never respected suffering would finally understand. Mama Okafor sat down on the ground in the middle of the open market. She did not faint. She just sat down because her legs stopped agreeing to hold her. Then Emeka Obi turned and walked to the edge of the village toward Amora's small house. Amora told me everything later that evening, sitting on the low bench outside her house with her wrapper pulled around her and her voice still carrying that slightly unreal quality of someone recounting a dream. She said he knocked softly. She opened the door expecting nobody of consequence. He was standing there in his suit and she did not know him at first because she had only ever seen him covered in dirt. Then she met his eyes and her whole body understood before her mind did. She said her first feeling was not joy or excitement. It was shame. She looked at her small cracked walls and her one good chair and the pot still sitting on the cold stove and she felt the particular shame of poverty that hits hardest when you suddenly become visible to someone you did not expect to be visible to. He saw it on her face immediately. He told her gently but directly, "Do not do that." He said her house was the most honest place he had stood inside in longer than he could remember. He told her the truth then. All of it. 3 months. 11 villages. A test he ran before every major decision in his life because he had learned that the truest thing about a person is not what they do when they know they are being watched but what they do when they are certain no one important is looking. In 3 months across 11 villages, Amora was the only person who had stopped. Not because she recognized him. Not because she wanted something from him. Not because anyone praised her for it. She stopped because he was a suffering human being and she was a human being who could not keep walking when she saw suffering. That was all. That was everything. He told her he had stopped believing that kind of heart still existed in a person who was not performing it for a reward. He told her finding her, was the thing he had not let himself hope for anymore. Then he asked her a simple question. Would she be willing to know him as just a man? No cars. No suits. No company. Just a man who had seen something in her that he had been looking for his entire life. Would she give that a chance? Amara sat in her small house with her one good chair and her cold stove and she looked at this man who was offering her something she had never even allowed herself to dream about. And she said yes. Quietly and completely. Yes. They were married the following year. The wedding was in the city in a hall so grand that some of our village people stood at the entrance for several minutes before they could convince their feet to walk inside. Amara wore gold and ivory and she walked into that hall with the same quiet steady step she had always used to walk through Ula market carrying firewood on her head. Nothing about her movements had changed. Only everything around her had. Emeka stood at the front of that hall and watched her come toward him with the same stillness he had carried sitting in the dirt under the Udola tree. Because that was who he was. The dirt and the suit were always just different clothes. The man inside them was always the same. Mama Okafor was not invited. Neither were the young men who had dragged him out of the village. Neither were the boys who had thrown stones. Nobody sent a letter asking why. They already knew. I still live in Ula village. The Udala tree is still standing. I walk past it almost every day and I always slow down a little when I reach it because I am always thinking about what that tree witnessed. About how the most important thing that ever passed through our village sat quietly under its branches for weeks while we showed it exactly who we were. I think about Amara most of all. About how she walked past the man every morning with her small wrap of food when the rest of us were using him for entertainment. About how she never once looked around to see if anyone was approving of her kindness before she gave it. About how she just gave it. Every day. Without applause. Without reward. Without even knowing what she was giving it to. I have tried to explain to people what kind of woman Amara was, and the best I can say is this: she was the kind of woman who would have kept feeding him even if those black cars had never come. Even if he had been exactly what we all thought he was. She would have kept going back to that tree every morning with her small plate of food because that is who she was, and the world's laughter had never been enough to change her. That is the part that humbles me most. Not that she was rewarded. But that her kindness was never about the reward. We had the same eyes she had. We saw the same suffering she saw. We just chose to look away and she chose to look closer. I have never fully forgiven myself for laughing that first day. I do not think I am supposed to. I think that shame is meant to stay, quietly, like a teacher that never leaves the room. Because the next time I see someone the world has decided is worthless, I want to remember what was sitting under that tree. And I want to remember what we almost missed. Some people are tested by fire. Some by poverty. And some by a dirty stranger under a tree who is waiting to see if anyone in this world still has a reason